What do you do when your name shows up hundreds of times in federal documents tied to one of the most infamous scandals in modern history, even though you were never accused of a single crime? Imagine building your entire adult life around being careful, staying quiet, working hard, avoiding headlines, only to wake up one day and see your family's private moments dissected in court files across the world. That's the position Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie now find themselves in. They didn't create the scandal, they didn't face charges, they didn't sit for damaging interviews, but their names are there, referenced in emails, travel records, family exchanges, tied to Jeffrey Epstein and the choices made by Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and Sarah Ferguson years ago. And now the question isn't whether they did anything wrong, it's how long they can stay silent while the story keeps growing. Because more documents are expected, more headlines are coming, and for the first time, breaking that silence is being seriously discussed. If you want the full story, the emails, the arrest, the divide, and the decision that could change everything, make sure you subscribe. This isn't just a royal scandal, it's a story about inheritance, loyalty, and the cost of a name. For most of their adult lives, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie did exactly what was expected of them, and then some. They stayed out of chaos. While other branches of the royal family battled headlines, interviews, and public missteps, the York sisters built something far less dramatic: stability. Beatrice moved steadily into the business world. She worked in strategic partnerships, technology, and corporate development before launching her own consultancy. No splashy announcements, no constant media trail, just boardrooms, client meetings, and a career shaped far from palace balconies. Eugenie carved out a completely different lane. She entered the art world and became a director at a respected London gallery. Alongside that, she co-founded the Anti-Slavery Collective, focusing on combating human trafficking. Serious, policy-driven work that positioned her as socially engaged and forward-thinking. They married, they became mothers, they appeared at family events when required, then returned to private life. Importantly, they were not working members of the monarchy. That meant no formal public duties, but also no institutional shield. Their reputations weren't protected by the crown. They were operating in the real world, where careers depend on trust and perception. For years, that strategy worked. Commentators often described them as grounded, modern, low risk. In a family that had weathered its share of storms, they seemed refreshingly calm. But there was one factor they could never fully separate from: their surname. No matter how carefully they built their own identities, it remained tied to decisions made long before they were old enough to understand them. And when new federal documents began surfacing, that connection stopped being background noise. It became the headline, and the insulation they had spent years constructing started to crack.
5 days after Jeffrey Epstein walked out of prison in 2009, a lunch was arranged in Palm Beach. At that table sat Sarah Ferguson and her 2 daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie. At the time, they were just 20 and 19 years old, young, not public decision-makers, not political players, just daughters traveling with their mother. Years later, that moment resurfaced in black and white. Newly released U.S. Justice Department documents included email threads suggesting Epstein covered the cost of flights for the trip, a bill purportedly totaling more than $14,000. The documents also revealed warm, informal communication between Ferguson and Epstein in the months that followed. The tone raised eyebrows, not because of criminal allegations against the sisters, there were none, but because of the familiarity. Then came something even harder to ignore. Emails showed that in 2011 and again in 2012, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor forwarded family Christmas cards to Epstein, photos included. This appeared to contradict earlier public claims that contact had ended sooner. That contradiction reignited scrutiny instantly. Suddenly, what had once been dismissed as distant association felt more current, more personal, more layered, and for Beatrice and Eugenie, the exposure was uncomfortable in a different way. Private family exchanges were no longer private. Their names appeared casually in correspondence that was never meant for public view. Mentions of daily life, references to relationships, ordinary details now preserved in federal records tied to a convicted offender. They weren't accused of wrongdoing, but they were mentioned repeatedly. And in today's media environment, proximity can be enough to pull someone into the storm. The headlines didn't frame them as suspects, they framed them as connected. Connected through travel, through family, through history. And once that connection was revived in official documents, it stopped being an old scandal resurfacing. It became an active narrative. Because the emails didn't just reopen questions about the past, they set the stage for what was about to unfold next.
It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a leak. It wasn't another headline built on old emails. It was a knock at the door. In February 2026, just after 8 a.m., 6 unmarked vehicles arrived at a residence on the Sandringham estate. By 10 a.m., confirmation came. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor had been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. The allegations centered on claims that during his time as a UK trade envoy between 2010 and 2011, confidential government material may have been shared. He denied wrongdoing. After roughly 11 hours in custody, he was released under investigation. But the image had already landed. A senior royal figure taken into custody, police vehicles on royal grounds, news alerts flashing across the world. It happened on his 66th birthday. Historically, it marked the first time in nearly 3 centuries that someone so high within the royal structure had been arrested. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. For the public, it shifted the tone from scandal to crisis. For Beatrice and Eugenie, it shifted something deeper. Watching your father face criticism is one thing. Watching him step back from public life is another. But watching him escorted into a police vehicle crosses into territory few families, royal or not, are prepared for. And the timing made it worse. Their names were already circulating again because of newly released documents. The emails had revived questions. The arrest amplified them. Now every headline about the investigation dragged the wider family back into view. They said nothing. No statement, no public defense, no visible outrage. Just silence. But silence in a moment like that doesn't freeze the story, it accelerates it. Because once an arrest enters the picture, speculation multiplies. Analysts debate consequences, commentators question what comes next, and inevitably, attention turns to those closest to the center. That's when observers began noticing something else. The sisters were not standing in the same place anymore.
Pressure doesn't just test reputations, it tests relationships. In the weeks surrounding the arrest, subtle differences began to emerge in how the two sisters were navigating the fallout. Reports in British tabloids suggested Eugenie had already created space well before the situation escalated. Insiders claimed there had been little to no recent contact, no Christmas visit, no visible alignment, nothing dramatic, just distance. For someone who co-founded an anti-trafficking charity, the optics were complicated. Public advocacy on one hand, family loyalty on the other. Even without direct accusations, the contradiction was uncomfortable. Remaining silent was one thing, appearing supportive was another. Beatrice, for a time, seemed to take a softer approach. She had been photographed horse riding with her father weeks before the arrest. He had been invited to private family milestones. There was no public break, no visible separation. But loyalty in private and loyalty in public are two different things, especially when cameras are watching. As scrutiny intensified, royal commentators began speaking more bluntly. Some warned that continued association risked allowing reputational damage to spread further. Others described the broader situation surrounding the York side of the family as deeply toxic. The word toxic stuck, not because it accused the sisters of wrongdoing, it didn't, but because it suggested contamination by proximity. Neither Beatrice nor Eugenie publicly criticized their father, neither offered public support either. They didn't defend, they didn't condemn. They chose stillness. But stillness under pressure creates its own tension. Because every new document release, every investigative update, every resurfaced email reopens the same question: where do they stand? And when that question lingers long enough, silence stops looking neutral, it starts looking strategic. Beatrice and Eugenie did what many second-generation royals attempt to do. They built parallel lives, careers outside palace walls, private families, professional identities not dependent on ceremony or state events. For years, that balance held. They were not at the center of controversy. They were not giving interviews. They were not making headlines. And yet, their names now sit permanently inside one of the most scrutinized scandal archives of the 21st century. Not because of actions they took, but because of proximity, because of emails sent, trips taken, decisions made by their parents years ago, because in a family like theirs, separation is never complete. History doesn't disappear, it resurfaces. They haven't been charged, they haven't been accused of crimes, but they are navigating something more complicated: reputational inheritance. More document releases are expected. The investigation surrounding Andrew Mountbatten Windsor remains unresolved. Public interest hasn't faded, it has sharpened. And every new development forces the same question back into the spotlight. Do they stay silent and let time pass, or do they step forward and draw a line of their own? When the scandal isn't yours, but the surname is, silence becomes heavier with every headline. The next move will matter, not just for them, but for how this chapter of royal history is remembered. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll continue following this story as it develops and as more documents, decisions, and details emerge. Because this isn't over, not even close.